want to draw, by way of conclusion, bring to your attention a comment of Susan Taubes, and this would be on text number 43. She wrote a study, The Gnostic Foundations of Heidegger's Nihilism in 1954. She was originally intending to write her doctoral thesis on Heidegger, but in the end abandoned that project and wrote on Simone Weil under the supervision of Tillich, Paul Tillich. In any event, she has a very interesting thing to say about Heidegger. Heidegger's anti-theological polemic is thus directed from a more radical theological position, and it's hyphenated in the original. We must recall that Christian theology is syncretistic. We are confronted with a tradition originating in a Gnostic, that's her, no, I didn't add that, Jewish heresy, which not only absorbed in itself the heterogeneous elements of Hellenistic mystery cults, but had to reconcile itself with systems as incompatible with each other as they were alien to itself, first with the Old Testament and then with Aristotelian metaphysics. Heidegger's polemic is directed against the biblical and metaphysical compromise of Christian theology and is thus carrying out a secret, esoteric, heretical Christian tradition. Now, I think that there are obvious parallels with what I set out to accomplish, but the crucial difference is that I emphasize the Jewish underpinning of the esoteric and heretical aspects of Heidegger's thought, and less the extent to which it is a hidden Christian tradition, even though Susan Taubes does postulate that this hidden tradition originated in Jewish heresy. If we assume that the Christian esotericism was deeply informed by the Jewish gnosis with roots in late antiquity, which she does assume, but most fully expressed in medieval Kabbalah, then it is imperative to lay claim to the Jewish underpinning of Heidegger's esoteric and heretical Christian tradition. And this, in good Heideggerian fashion, should embolden us to give thought to what is unthought. Let me just conclude with these words. I think it's fair to say we live in an era, intellectually or academically speaking, that notoriously celebrates difference. But when talking about matters Jewish, to be candid, I think we always have to reflect on the question, will the difference, a sense of difference from what is accepted as different be tolerated as an acceptable difference? And perhaps what is needed in the academy is a way of thinking that acknowledges sameness or belonging together, as Heidegger would have put it, a sameness that fosters rather than undermines difference. Despite his obvious and inexcusable shortcomings, Heidegger did offer a genuine sense of indifference that moves beyond the dialectical identity of identity and non-identity. And indifference to this question runs the peril of leading one to mistake the same for the difference, the consequence of which would be masking the different as the same. In Heidegger and Kabbalah, I sought to walk the path between mistaking the same as different and masking the different as same, envisioning the mandate to behold the same difference that begets what is differently the same. That's it.
Thank you very much.
You know, the problem is that philosophy, and this is what I probably will speak about, every philosopher has his own work. You know, he has nearly like an artwork. We say that it's incomparable to take Nietzsche. Nietzsche wrote the Zarathustra. This is an artwork. This is poetry. This is something singular, and Heidegger shares that Hölderlin is singular, that Hegel is singular. But in the tradition of Kabbalah, it seems to me that there is something else, that history is not experienced as a line of singularities, but that there is something more like receiving a tradition without any, for instance, concept of progress, without any concept of
change,
of the new, for instance, of the revolution, of a rupture in history. What for Heidegger is very important. So, I would say that maybe it's another perspective to take the word Anfang in German. In German, Anfang. What could you? The beginning.
Beginning.
Yeah, the beginning. For Heidegger, it's quite clear that he is not. The heritage for him is a complex term, and also a critical term, because of course thinking as being in the event means being in the beginning.
Yeah.
And what I understand what I thought I understood when I looked on the Jewish tradition, it doesn't mean being in the beginning as being in a certain moment of history, but so one could also say, is there even these concepts of history, are they comparable? So this is much, I know, but
it's a lot.
But it's a lot. But actually, I would really like to understand what is the object of the reception of Kabbalah.
Yeah. So it's a lot. I just want. Okay, so I didn't read this. I'm going to start by reading the words of Altman, but then I want to address your specific question. But just it's so interesting to me. So this is I didn't get a chance to read it. So this is an essay that Altman wrote, and I think it's 34. It's in the 30s. So he's talking there about the existential moments adduced by Heidegger of heritage and destiny. See the German words there. Could prove to be decisive for an understanding of Jewish existence.
What number is this?
The last one, 46. Even these structures, however, are not quite adequate for the singular phenomenon of Jewish existence if they are understood as purely ontological, immanent entities. Rather, in the Jewish case, these concepts display a very conscious turning toward a transcendent moment of divine revelation. It's very interesting. Now, to your specific question, so, okay. Kabbalah is, that which is received. Now, of course, in the mind of the Kabbalists, they're finally committing to writing, and not fully, because we still have hints in the Kabbalistic literature that not all the secrets are fully divulged in writing, particularly the practices, meditational and contemplative practices seem to have been transmitted orally and less in writing, although there are a few exceptions. So there is a shift from orality to writing. And I tried to explain some of the historical reasons that may have been the factors that caused that shift. Okay, but if we take them at their word, so what is the Kabbalah? Well, the Kabbalah is very complex. There are different traditions, but the predominant content of the Kabbalah is the theosophic structure of divinity, the Esosphirot, a locution that comes from the Sefer Yetzirah that Michael referred to in his introductory remarks. So that's the stuff of the Kabbalah. Now, there's a very complicated interplay between new and old, which I think isn't so far from Heidegger. Right? And you remember Heidegger says somewhere that to repeat is to be altogether otherwise. So there's this sense of the novelty. Repetition means, in a sense, to be novel, right? And to me, that actually works for the Kabbalah as well, because there is. I don't know if there's ruptures in history. That's a very interesting question that I need to think about. But hermeneutically speaking, the Kabbalists are also informed by this paradox that repetition means change. What it means to be old is that it's new, right? And that accounts for all the multiplicity and diversity that unfolds in the Kabbalistic literature. Right? I don't know. I mean, your comments were,
No, this is good. It's okay. It's yeah.
So, and also about the Anfang, is it a return to the beginning for them? In some sense, it is. If we think about it in the Heideggerian sense, what it means through thought to return to a beginning. In some sense, it is for them always a return to a beginning, to go back. That's what it means to receive the tradition. You're going back to what was. But in an understanding that to go back to what was means to articulate something novel. And this is a deep structure in rabbinic thinking. You have to, every time you study the Torah, it's as if you're receiving it again, anew. Right? The rabbis have that idea, hermeneutically speaking. The revelation is ongoing.
Yeah, okay.
So Shalom's famous essay, Revelation and Tradition, he pits the two against one another. But a deeper immersion in the rabbinic sensibility, and then of course the Kabbalistic, would suggest that revelation and tradition are not in opposition to one another. They're one and the same, which means same because they're different.
You touched on this a couple of times. I want to, my approach in general is to try to think as simply as possible, and of course it's never as simple, but at least to try to springboard to make it as simple as possible.
It says, seek simplicity and distrust it.
Perfect. That's a beautiful idea. So if we take, which I take Heidegger's idea of Dichtung and its relationship to Sprache very seriously. And I also find very interesting, he has two expressions. One says that the Urdichtung ist die Sprache. Another one says Ursprache ist Dichtung. And I take them to be different in meaning. The way and I might be wrong on this, by the way. What I understand by, first of all, Ursprache is a primordial language. In other words, it's not the language that we're necessarily speaking. Sprache is what we speak.
So what is the Ursprache?
So the Dichtung, which creates the Ursprache, would be the Dichtung, the poetry that slang. Language is, my children always make me very aware that language is always shifting. They always say, words come out of them, I say, what does that mean? And they explain the slang to me. So over centuries, this isn't one lifetime, over time, every single explosion of slang is a micro poem that originates with who knows whom. And then original language that is created by this constant shifting of slang, I would say, for lack of a better word. And then when he says the opposite then now when he says Urdichtung ist die Sprache, he explains this. This is in the Introduction to Metaphysics. He says, what I mean is Homer. I don't mean slang. I don't mean what the average person creates on a daily basis with language. I mean when a great poet comes along and bombastically creates a language in the way, for example, that Dante decided what Italian is today, right? And in Dante's time, his dialect of Italian was just one dialect among many, just like in Homer's time. The Ionic dialect that Homer used was only one of about 14, 15 major dialects. But after Homer, his dialect, the Ionic dialect of Homer, became standard, and then Attic Greek picked up on that. So why am I saying all of this? Because I think, I agree with Heidegger that our reality is fundamentally structured by language in a very fundamental way. And the parameters of what's possible for us to think is structured by language. So if you're a Greek living well, not in Homer's time, but say 100 years after Homer, your ability to think is limited by what you learned from Homer. You cannot think what Homer did not teach, or only with tremendous effort can you begin to think what Homer didn't teach. You have to really work against the grain. That's why Plato, for example, in the Republic says Homer was the educator of Greece. You cannot think, well, Plato actually in the Republic makes heroic, titanic efforts to break through Homeric thinking. And I think he succeeds, and he creates he makes a new linguistic breakthrough. Now, if that's the case, now, first of all, I don't know if you'll accept that, my reading of Heidegger's understanding of Dichtung. If that's the case, wouldn't it be, again, simplistic, but wouldn't it be right to say that Moses and Abraham, let's say Moses, for the sake of argument, Moses is an archi-poet. You know, Moses, if I can flip Hölderlin around, right? Moses is the Kant of the ancient Hebrews. He creates Hebrew, as Hebrew is known. He creates the parameters of thinking so that a Jew in the ancient world cannot really think outside of Moses. Until, of course, Alexander comes along and makes it possible for Jews to meet the Greeks. And then you have this tremendous problem of, well, we have now two peoples, both of them limited by their poets, by what they're able to speak and therefore to think. And then the question is, well, how does translation happen here? And isn't something inevitably lost in translation? This, of course, I'm coming to the end of my comment here, my question. This then creates the problem of affinities, right? Because if you have two distinct heritages, each with its own limits, and that's really what I want to stress, they're both limited, then how does translation take place between them? And if there is affinity between them, which is what translation assumes, because you cannot translate unless there's affinity, then where does that spring from? How is that possible?
So the reason I started with the inside-outside dichotomy is precisely this, that I knew we're going to keep coming up to this.
Right.
My brain is just not wired this way, right? I don't see these first of all, I have a question about the way you're rendering Dichtung. We could discuss that.
Yeah.
And I still don't know what he means by Ursprache. I don't know if he means it in the sense that Benjamin meant it, that it's actually not a specific language, but the possibility for language. But that's also something we can talk about. But to get to the heart of your question, I get it. And it comes up again and again. If you start from the point of view of a sharp binary between what's inside and outside, then you're going to keep pressing the question, how do we explain the way to bridge? I start from the position of standing on a bridge, which means I can see an inside and an outside, but to me, for the bridging of those always presupposes their separateness. And the other thing that I said, the historical dimension of the inside-outside, to me, it's constantly fluctuating. So if I was an ancient Near Eastern scholar, right, I would be studying what we find in Hebrew scripture, and I would be breaking down that dichotomy by studying the other ancient Near Eastern cultures. And as I said, and the quote, that at a certain point, what is appropriated externally becomes internalized, and you have some kind of stasis. You have some kind of clear boundary, but that boundary then becomes disrupted again. So, I mean, we may have a genuine machloket l'shem shamayim here.
I think we do, but it might not be so so extreme. I'll tell, because just to qualify.
Because I don't think of, I didn't dedicate my life to studying the ancient Near East. But I would never think of Moses in a way that secludes the figure of Moses and the construction of the figure of Moses from influences outside of the Hebraic.
Yes, I actually wouldn't either. I wouldn't, and I would say, I taught a course on Freud that Moses is shaped by Egypt. Even the text itself.
Well, that was Freud.
Freud's reading, right? So even the story of Moses itself is telling us he was a stranger who could barely speak. And Freud says he couldn't speak Hebrew.
Yeah, he may have gone too far, Freud.
Yeah, I have no problem. I have no problem with the idea of a natural syncretism that shapes any tradition. Natural forces of syncretism. In other words, any given tradition, simply by virtue of being in touch with other traditions quite physically, and certainly at a literary level, will absorb and will give off and so on, like an organism.
Yeah, exactly.
So all I'm saying, this is kind of touching on what Peter was saying earlier, that when we nevertheless, and given this, and I think I kind of agree with you that things really are in flux. Nevertheless, we do speak of traditions in a strangely dogmatic way.
They get reified.
What?
We reify, yeah. I get that.
But you don't think that there's.
But the reification is always subject to disruption.
For sure, it is. But all I'm saying is that because look, if we're trying to understand there's a certain Auseinandersetzung between, say, a German thinking and a Jewish thinking. On the whole, if embodied in Heidegger and one embodied in Judaism, just like, for example, the Maccabee situation. Let's call it the Maccabees, right? That there was a tension that was felt at some point in history between Jews and Greeks. Now, of course, that tension was very, very quickly worked out. They already, as soon as they felt the tension, Jew Greeks became Greek Jews.
By the way, what language do we know historically of that tension? Greek.
Sorry, what do you mean?
How do we know now about that tension? Through what language was it primarily preserved?
Yeah, sure, because of the Book of Maccabees, of course. Yeah.
In what language?
In what language? Yeah, in Greek, yeah, of course.
Okay, so that's my point.
Yeah. I don't understand, what's the...
Because even the sharp division between Hellenistic and Hebraic was communicated historically and preserved to us through the language of Greek.
Yes, yeah.
So that's my point about the complexity of what's inside, what's outside.
Actually, you see, this is kind of...
am I making sense at all?
No, I think this is part of my question. I'll shut up in a second, but part of my question is I like what you said. First of all, empirically, of course, you're absolutely right that there's more about that tension in Greek than there is in Hebrew. But there is also in Hebrew, starting with a little paragraph in the Masechet Shabbos, but there is, whenever there is a conflict...
That's much later.
Okay, but whenever there's a conflict, that conflict is seen from two different perspectives, and each perspective will have its own view of that conflict.
Okay.
So the Greeks had a view of the conflict, and the Jews, to some extent, did also. Say it only becomes articulated for the first time seriously in Philo, where there's already an attempt to bridge that conflict. But the conflict is felt from two different camps, no?
To be sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, to be sure.
So if the conflict is felt from two different camps, there's a certain amount of polarization. Now, granted, I know it's very, very complex. I'm sorry. I know whenever I do this, it sounds like I'm trying to simplify and make a Batman versus the Joker type of picture here of black and white and antagonism. And I don't think it's that simple. And I think you beautifully do justice to the complexity of the issue. But given that complexity, isn't there nevertheless, even in the end of the day, a certain tension between two Shittas, as it were, two Weltanschauungen? And if there is, then we come back to our question, which is how then does translation take place? How does discussion take place?
Oh yeah, I forgot it. Oh, right. Yeah. So Heidegger is very helpful here because translation for him is confrontation with the foreign, with the other. So translation, to answer your question, at least on that point, translation itself is only necessary and possible because of the way you're thinking of it. There has to be some sense of Again, I think he's mostly talking here about German and Greek, but we can extend the boundaries of his thought because I think there's a kind of surplus and pliability in his thinking that can go beyond his more limited sense. But you can think of translation as precisely accomplishing that. It's a bridge. Again, the metaphor of the bridge.
I have more to say, but I want to give somebody else a chance.
But
So,
maybe it has something to do with that. Zarader, you know the book. For her, it's a question.
Maybe tell everybody about the book. How's it called?
Unthought Death.
The Unthought Death. Yeah, go ahead, sorry.
Her question is why Heidegger was excluding the Jewish tradition from the Western tradition. So Heidegger is constructing, one could say, a tradition, a culture, maybe from, like you said, Greek metaphysics and German thinking, in a way. And he's excluding the Jewish, and even in a way he's also excluding the Christian tradition because he's very critical with the Christians. But nevertheless, one could say that he began as a Catholic theologian, so you can say that there is definitely a Christian influence on Heidegger's thinking, but he is really, the only thing what is excluded is the Jewish tradition. And this is Zarader's question: why is that happening, and can that be actually? So, and she has a certain response to that. Now, the problem is that Heidegger would say history. Like I mentioned before, this term. Everything what is happening in history is singular, and has a certain meaning concerning what he is thinking as the history of being. So for him it's quite clear that the encounter between Germans and Greeks have a meaning for the totality of the history. Mm-hmm. The meaning, even a futural meaning for what is to come. Mm-hmm. There must be something coming out of this and between this
encounter.
Of this encounter, and this is what he actually would say that everything what is happening on this level has a certain meaning. So he is of course not a historian in this sense. He is not neutralizing these kind of encounters, and in this sense one could say that. The belonging together, how you are thinking it's also possible on the basis of Heidegger's thinking, Heidegger's later thinking, but it's outside of this being historical horizon in a certain way. I would say, because then you should say there must be a certain meaning in this encounter between Kabbalah and Heidegger. There must be a very important meaning, maybe for the future of thinking. Yeah. But this is not what you, as I understand you, this is not what you would say. You would. It sounded like you would neutralize it a little bit.
No. I think cast in those terms, I think it's a corrective to the ethnocentrism of both.
Okay.
That's the underlying. Ethical import of my work, that bringing out this triangulation of land, language, and peoplehood, and moving to a corrective. So, on that point, I would you might say that I don't accomplish that, or that.
But this is interesting because Heidegger would also say, this is what you're quoting from the Hölderlin lecture courses. The Greeks are the Greeks and the Germans are the Germans. Of course, there is this Böhlendorf letter by Hölderlin where Hölderlin speaks of the own of the Greeks and the own of the Germans, and that there must be a confrontation between that. But of course, everything stays in their own.
Yeah.
So, in the sense, when you say that has something to do with the ethnocentrism of the Germans and of the Jewish tradition. Then there must be Well, then it has to be a certain model of encounter, I would say. It must
Yeah.
be something
Yeah.
more disturbing in a way.
Well, exactly. It is disarming or disturbing, but I would also say that the corrective to the other side of the coin here is that it is also an acclaiming or an appropriation of particularity, because I don't want to lose that particularity
Okay.
or that singularity,
Yeah. Okay.
right? Because that's the richness of the tradition.
Mm-hmm.
So it's trying to proverbially burn the candle at both ends. You know, not to allow the particularity to overwhelm one's Weltanschauung, such that, you know, there's really an othering of the other, and in certain political, social, historical contexts can be very, very problematic. But yet at the same time, not lose that sense of specificity and singularity.
Elliot, do you have a question that you want to, based on our discussion?
Do I have a question?
Yeah, no, or something you want to pursue based on our...
Question about my own being? Or,
No, I mean about the conversations. Was something we discussed, because we're jumping around a little bit. So
there are a lot. No, there are a lot of threads here but I don't have a specific question now. But a lot of things that have come up need to be pursued much more carefully. No question about it. Your comments, Peter's comments, some other comments. But no.
I want to ask you something about, especially because you brought in Chabad thought, and
I couldn't go as deep as I wanted to.
Obviously,
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys know, Professor Wolfson has as complicated as his book is on Heidegger, he has an equally complicated one on Chabad as well. So, you know, in this actually is touching on what I'll discuss tomorrow, in the ontological difference, which of course is heavily problematized in the Beiträge. And the Beiträge questions what had been up until that point since 1927, since the Grundprobleme, Phänomenologie. So since then, that's when in the Grundprobleme he starts to discuss, he uses the terminology of ontological difference. Right. And then in the Beiträge, around that period, he starts to question it and try to move beyond it, beyond that difference.
Tries to move beyond it. Yeah. Whether or not he ever did is a question.
Yeah, well, okay. I mean, yes, but I want to, just to operate from that standpoint, because it's beyond it. I mean, you're really good at moving beyond it. I definitely am not. I mean, in all humility, I have a difficulty thinking through what he's trying to do when he says, let's forget the difference. So I like to operate as much as possible as I can within that difference. The difference is, of course, the difference between Sein und das Seiende.
Right.
Being and the being, which in English is impossible to translate. Right. Tomorrow I will use the word thing. It's not a good translation, but I like it because it sounds simple. That's the only reason. I'm not the first person to suggest that, by the way. He's translated being with a small b or entity, whatever. But let's say,
but if you
being an entity.
If you pluralize it, it's not difficult in English.
Being and beings, yeah, that's how Maguire and Robinson, that was their tradition, That's how they started.
So that's easy for an English speaker to
understand. So when you have this ontological difference, which is so much of Heidegger's setup, his story, is about this difference, how being withdraws and leaves beings behind in its Lichtung, in its clearing, or so on.
I don't think he leaves it behind, but it brings them to manifestation.
But it does withdraw.
Being withdraws.
Being withdraws.
It makes possible the beings to appear.
Exactly.
But it doesn't leave them behind.
Well, there's ausbleiben. He does use words like to leave, to stay away.
But that's reflective on Sein.
Of course, and there's also Seinsverlassen, there's the abandonment of beings, right? So, of course, and again, all of this is problematic because while on the one hand there's this moving away from beings, on the other hand there's a return to them also, right? So even though there's a concealment of being, in order to allow for an unconcealment of beings, not a thea of beings, nevertheless, as you pointed out, there is also, being somehow becomes revealed within even though it's concealed, and nevertheless there is a type of revelation. Now, as you pointed out, in the Chabad take on Kabbalah, there's a similar move with Atzmus. But on the one hand, there's a retraction. On the other hand, God is most present in this moment right now, right here, even though he's completely retracted.
Yeah.
My question is this, in Chabad, so much effort is made in Chabad thinking and writing to say that this has happened, as it were, without remainder. And I don't know if you'll agree with me or not.
What do you
In other
mean?
words,
I don't know what you mean yet.
I try to think of a concrete metaphor. A father is playing with children in a room,
Yeah.
and the father says, it's time to go to bed, but don't worry, I will be with you. I'm going in the next room, and you have to go to sleep, but I'm not gone. My essence is still with you.
Yeah.
So you could say, well, is the child happy or unhappy? Maybe the most mature child will somehow feel that even though the father is absent, nevertheless, he feels the presence of the father. I don't know how. Maybe the story he told him, and he remembers the story, he feels that presence very powerfully. Another child would just cry and say, Papa or Mama's gone. I can't feel his presence. In Chabad thinking, there's a great effort is made to say that this retreat has happened without remainder. In other words, feel comforted that the Atzmus is still with you.
Yeah.
Hashem has not abandoned you.
Yeah.
Yes, it's true he's infinite and you're finite. It's very difficult to reconcile the infinite and the finite, but there is nevertheless a presence here. Do you think that the same is accomplished in Heidegger? Without remainder?
With regard.
With regard to Verborgenheit and then with Unverborgenheit. In other words, given the ontological difference, that Sein goes through an Entzug, it withdraws itself, and yet nevertheless, is there some sense in which that ontological difference is bridged, and Sein somehow is found in Das Seiende in the end?
Yeah. Yes, I do think so. I'm looking to see if I quoted any specific text that would support me. I'm not sure I do here, but I do think so. I think something similar is going on for Heidegger, and that, clearly Sein can never be identified with any of the beings, right? So in that sense, there is always the differential. However, that differential is somewhat overcome by the fact, right, that it is being, not the being. It is being. It is the withdrawal. It is the withdrawal of being that makes possible the manifestation of beings. Right. Now, of course, it's not going to work out identically to the way that you presented the Chabad thinking, because even though it was you try to concretize it, there is a theistic emphasis in Chabad, which obviously is not in Heidegger. And that theistic emphasis is what, by using your example of the presence of the father to the children or to the child, even though the father withdraws. So, yeah, Chabad will, living within the theistic tradition of Judaism, and including Jewish mysticism, they will emphasize that sense of the divine presence, in Dira B'Tachtonim, that God wants a habitation below. So no, but if you take it up a level of abstraction and get beyond a post-theistic reflection on this, so the relationship of being to beings would be analogous to the relationship of the Or Ein Sof to the Hishtashalut HaOlamot, the concatenation of the worlds, until and including you get down into this world. But the very nature, this is what I was trying to point out, the very nature of worldhood for them is structured by the world play between Ha'olam and Ha'alem. Worldhood for them is concealment. What's being concealed? What's being concealed is that which cannot be disclosed in a davar nifrad, in a separate being, ontologically separate. by the way, it's concealed and not withdrawn. That's the big argument. There was an argument amongst Kabbalists: is the contraction the Tzimtzum literal or not? Right. So in the time of the Shner Zalman of Liadi, there was a big debate between him and the Vilna Gaon, right? And Shner Zalman said, Tzimtzum lo kifshuto, right? Meaning it's not literal. So what did he mean by not literal? What he meant by that, we could never say that God withdraws God's light. That's what he meant by lo kifshuto. What we can say is that God conceals or hides. But to really understand Chabad thinking is predicated on one understanding the paradox that hiddenness is disclosure. That which is infinite can only be manifest by being unmanifest. And that I do find analogous to what Heidegger was trying to articulate. Right, but there is obviously a very big difference in the way existentially how it affects the person in this world.
Meaning? Okay, go on.
Well, what you said. No, they're just building on what you said. For Chabad, the emphasis would be that you feel the presence of God. Now, by the way, how do they often refer to God? Eibishter. So what does Eibishter mean?
It means lintel, I think. Like literally the above. Yeah.
Yeah, so that.
Uber.
So Uber. Exactly. So it means that which is beyond us.
Yeah.
But they use that Yiddish expression to refer to the intimacy of a personal relationship to God.
Yeah, that's true. It's 2:00. I don't want to. Yeah, sorry.
Well, I guess that in Heidegger at least, but this would be also probably maybe a dialogue or a discussion about messianism. In Heidegger, of course, this relation between being and beings is historical. That means that he's right that for Heidegger the machination, Machenschaft and Gestell is a problem. Sometimes it sounds like the absence or the withdrawing of being is so strong that it has catastrophic consequences for everybody, for the planet, for you know. And sometimes it seems to be for him possible, like for instance in the national revolution of the National Socialists, that being is in a way like the God more present, and is in a way that it is cared for, and that we, you know. And this is something what in Heidegger is very complicated, because not very complicated. I would say he didn't do it. He didn't make it with this problem. But of course the relation between being and beings is in itself historical. Yeah. It's not a stable relation. Right. And that was for Heidegger probably, well, yeah, maybe a problem he couldn't solve. But it's Chabad. This Chabad structure sounds very stable and in a way not historical. So in a way, what is the question of the Messiah? Probably something what we could also speak about in reference to Heidegger, because we have the last God in Heidegger.
The last God,
and
can I ask you a question?
No. It's not a question actually. It's just I wanted to emphasize that this relation between being and beings is, you know, I think, or it seemed to me, more dynamic than this Chabad structure.
I hear it.
But the point is then the meaning of the Messiah. So okay.
Wait, sorry, I'm going to interrupt. I'm sorry. I have to just for respect of our audience, because it's 2:00.
Oh, okay.
So if anybody, I don't want to embarrass people. If anybody wants to leave, we'll stay on for a little while and continue talking. But you know, officially we end at 2:00. So if anybody wants to leave, you know, feel free. Oh, look, wow, like a captive audience.
So,
okay.
the messianic thing is a whole other dimension, but I would say, what is the last God, right? So it seems to me the last God is the God that is always coming, and therefore is not a God that can ever come. And there's some ways to understand that exactly like the Messiah in Judaism. Because the coming of the Messiah is precisely, the Messiah is not coming. But not everybody would agree. Not everybody would agree with it. Not everybody would agree with it, but many would agree with it. And speaking of history, history may be the judge on this. Right. Because thus far, everyone identified as a Messiah within Jewish history is eventually judged to be a false Messiah.
From a certain point in Jewish history.
You know what?
Okay, but that's from a certain point. But that's right. From a certain point in Jewish history, right? So, but
It's not all that long ago, right? It's after the time of the last Messiah in Jewish history, right? Tzidkiyahu is the last Mashiach Hashem, or the last of the kings of Judah, right? It's not. It's a long time, but it's not that long ago.
okay, right. Yeah. But I had a question for you though. So you said in some historical moments, being is more present for Heidegger. So what does that mean exactly? How is being more present? What does he mean by that?
Well, the thing is that well, maybe one could explain that with. You asked for the ontological difference. And the overcoming of the ontological difference. Well, the new topic for Heidegger is Unterschied.
Yeah.
And the Unterschied is gathering the fourfold. This is, it's an Unterschied between world and thing.
The difference.
The difference, yeah, the Unterschied. Well, in his language.
As opposed to difference, you mean, yeah?
The overcoming of the being historical overcoming of ontological difference is Unterschied in the later texts. I guess this is what he is thinking. But the thing is that if you take the fourfold for Heidegger is of course not a description of the world.
Right.
The fourfold is the counterpart of the Gestell.
Right.
So in this sense, you have this maybe utopian moment or whatever in Heidegger that he thinks there could be a world where this relation between the absence of being and the presence of the beings can be experienced differently. It can be an experience. You know that, for instance, this is linked with, of course, with the finiteness of existence. For him, it's important not to, for instance, to the problem of dying, of death.
Yeah.
To accept your finiteness is, in a way, for Heidegger, linked to the experience of a one could say of a certain absence of being. So if you are, for instance, if you try to avoid your dying, like what he says is analysis in Being and Time, the they is avoiding the finiteness of the human being. That's for him a sign of the abandonment of being.
Yeah.
So in the being historical sense, it means that if we, for instance, learn to be the mortals, this is his title, that we learn to be mortals, that would be then a different, one could say, a different response to being. But we are not the mortals. He says it explicitly in the Brehm Vorträge. We are not the mortals. And this is the historical structure in Heidegger's thinking, that he thinks maybe there will be a world where we can be the mortals, but then we really have to make this experience of a certain absence of being. But we don't want to experience the absence. This is metaphysics. We just want presence. We want presence of everything.
Right.
So, and this is the being historical dimension in Heidegger's thinking. That maybe it has also a practical dimension, one could say. But this is the point.
But I don't see. I mean, of course, I could be wrong here. I just don't see anywhere where presence is not also at the same time absence. For him.
For him?
Yeah.
Yeah, for him, of course, but not for Plato.
No, not for Plato.
But this
we
is,
don't
but
have
this
to
is-
worry about Plato.
No, but this is the problem of metaphysics. And Heidegger would say that we still are living in a metaphysical world. That we didn't overcome metaphysics.
No, I understand.
In
that.
our everyday life, we think everything is present. For
Right.
instance, the nature and what we can do with nature is, well, that's because it's for us. We can use it.
Right.
So, and this is in this sense, this is linked to this problem between a being historical thinking and a metaphysical thinking.
Right.
And I would say that to say something critical, Heidegger would say Chabad thinking is in a way metaphysics.
I think so. I think so, yes. I'm sure he would say that.
Yeah.
Wrongly, but he would say that. I mean, correctly structurally. But
Who would say that?
Heidegger would say Chabad is metaphysics. And I think, of
Oh,
course,
yeah. Well, Heidegger, what does he know?
I'm saying even if he knew, even if he read, Bossi Lagani, he'd say, oh, well, this is Jewish metaphysics.
I don't know. I'm not sure because because the whole question of metaphysical Chabad is also a very delicate and complicated thing. And
I don't think Chabad is metaphysics. I'm just saying Heidegger would think.
yeah. Oh, okay.
That's all I'm saying.